There, my name is Jeffrey Klein. I'd like to present an alternative way to conduct live poker tournaments. I think this approach has many unique qualities that go a long way to enhancing the game and increasing the equity for skilled players. Some of the noticeable problems with live tournaments are listed here. Because of constraints with chip values, blind level increases are choppy. The blind increases from level to level vary in their impact on stack sizes. As the tournament progresses, some deep stacks events even become less deep. Once the average stack is low compared to the blinds, the skill level declines. Late in tournaments, some of the larger chip stacks become so physically large that they are hard to move, take up too much space, and require dealers to take an inordinate amount of time counting out chips during a hand. Color-ups do help, but fail to completely eliminate this problem. Additionally, color-ups are time-consuming and require considerable manpower. My proposal is a shift in thinking. Instead of increasing the blinds each level, why not just decay the stacks? With this structure, you would need only 5 different chips for gameplay throughout any tournament. These are the ante, the small and big blinds, and larger chips representing 5 and 10 big blinds. Tournament designers could choose to vary the value of ante chips in relation to the big blind to alter the effect that antes have on the play. A 1/4 big blind ante would have more impact than a 1/10 of big blind ante. Starting stacks are designed to meet the desired structure. Faster tournaments with lower buy-ins would have substantially fewer big blinds in their starting stacks compared with larger buy-in multiple-day events. The level length will go a long way in determining how much play a player gets, just as now longer levels provide more play. The process of decay would be as a percentage of the average stack. At the end of the level, each player surrenders a predetermined number of big blinds. The number is a percentage of the average stack. The example here would require surrendering 10% of an average stack or 30 big blinds each level. Tournament designers could vary the percentage decay from one tournament to another to create faster or slower tournaments. As an example, a 20% decay would be a much faster tournament than a 10% decay. I will show you an example of this later. Players choosing to enter late or re-enter events would start with lower stacks that have been decayed depending on the level they start in. Dealers would have ample chips in the well from decayed stacks to make change for new players. As players get shorter, you don't want to have them decaying out of the tournament. When a player's chip stack gets twice the decay or lower, then he must surrender half his stack. As an example, in a 300 big blind 10% decay tournament, all players will surrender 30 big blinds each level until they are at 60 big blinds or lower. From that point on, until they are above 60 big blinds, they must surrender half of their stacks. As an example, a player with 50 big blinds would only decay 25. As tables break, the surrendered chips are removed from play. Players with larger stacks can be given 100 big blind lammers to facilitate moving. Once at the new table, players convert the lammers into playing chips that have been collected during the decay. These are the only chips that you would need. An ante chip, a small blind chip, a big blind chip, a 5 big blind chip, and a 10 big blind chip. This would be the only chips that you would need throughout the whole tournament. Now, the ante chip can be worth whatever you want it to be worth. It can be worth 1/4 of a big blind or 1/10 of a big blind, depending on how much impact you want the antes to have in the tournament structure. In this example, I'm using the antes are 1/10 of a big blind. Now, the small blind is always half of a big blind, 5 big blinds, 10 big blinds, self-explanatory. With that, the deepest tournament you could have, 300 big blinds as a starting stack, fairly deep tournament, you would only need 81 chips to start the tournament. You would have 2 big blinds in ante chips, and you'd have 5 big blinds in small blind chips. You can have 18 big blind chips, so that gives you mostly what you need for all of your pre-flop action and anteing in these chips. And then here you have 10 of the 5 big blind chips for 100, and 18 of the 10 big blind chips for 180. So in 81 chips, you have a 300 big blind stack, 300 big blind starting stack. Now, comes time for the table to break. And the tournament director or whoever's breaking the table comes to the table maybe 2 hands before or 1 hand before and says, "I'm breaking this table." Then the larger stacks, then they can start separating out their chips. Usually they're bigger chips because once the table breaks, they're going to come out. The tournament director comes over and he will give you a couple of 100 big blind chips. So in this particular situation, you could take this entire stack. Here's 300 big blinds in one stack, each one worth 100. And then you send this person on to their next table. And when they get to their next table, they get chips out of the dealer's well from all the decayed chips. It makes moving from one table to the next very easy. The table gets broken down, all these chips are going to come out of play, and the tournament continues. I'm going to demonstrate stack decay using this spreadsheet. Over here are the effects that you're going to see for each varying criteria that we input. This is the level on this column. This is the amount of blinds removed per player per level in this column. This is the remaining players in this column, and in this column the late entry stacks. So if you were to come in a later level, you would be given fewer blinds to start that level, and this is the cumulative time for the tournament in the absence of breaks. So this won't take into account dinner or the between level breaks. So let's start with the first example, which is the more common type of nightly, weekly, one-day tournament that you would see in Las Vegas. We'll start in this tournament with 140 players, each stack of 80 big blinds, with a 20% decay of the average stack and half-hour levels. You would see that each level, 16 blinds, would be removed from each player's stack, with the exception of those who are 32 and fewer blinds, and those players would then relinquish half of their stack with each level increase. So the effect that you would see here is the starting field of 140 would be down to halfway within 4 to 5 levels. This is 2 to 3 hours of into about 2 to 3 hours of play. The starting stack of 80 blinds would decay down for the people entering late or re-entering the tournament up to whatever level the tournament designer said, well, maybe we'll stop taking new entries at the 5th level, and at that point you'll get 12 blinds. Now, using this formula, you can see we would be down to the final table in 6 to 7 hours, and then that's a good structure for a nightly, weekly type tournament with a fairly fast structure. Now, if you wanted to, you could space this out a little bit more. If you space it out to 10% decay, you can see the effect would be that it would take almost 13 hours to get to the final table, which you may want to do if it's a slightly higher buy-in with that type of field. All right, let's take a look now at maybe a World Series event. It's more of a preliminary multi-day event with 2,000 players. You'd start with 200 blinds, and you do a 15% decay and have 1 hour levels. Let's look at the effect that this has. Now, you're going to have a multi-day event. Most of the World Series events will only have 10 hours of play in them, so here's the end of day one right here. So you can see that for a 2,000 player tournament, at the end of the first day, you would be down to 390 at the end of the first day, so you wouldn't be quite into the money yet after 10 hours of levels, which kind of mimics about what you would expect to see at World Series events. Then day two starts, and within 10 levels, you're down to be under 100 players, and then the final third day you play through the final table. So this mimics kind of what you would see with a preliminary, maybe $1,500 9-player per table type of tournament that they play on the weekend, starting on the weekend. They're usually 3-day events. Okay, let's look at an example of using the main event of the World Series. Assuming 8,000 players, you give them 300 blinds and do a 12% decay with 2-hour levels, and see the effect that it would have here. So typically you would play 5 levels, they'd be down to approximately half the field at the end of the first day after 10 hours of play. At the end of day 2, 20 hours of play, you'd be down to 2,200 players. At the end of 30 hours, now you're getting close to 1,100 players. And between day 3 and day 4, 40 hours of play, the money bubble will burst, which is kind of what you see nowadays with the World Series main event. Now, one of the complications with this is that then the rate of decline of players drops off with this level of decay. So what you'd probably have to do in these very large fields with multi-day events is you would have to increase your decay from 12% to something a little bit higher to get the field down to the final table between levels 40 and 45. I'm going to use this spreadsheet to compare and contrast the way that tournaments are currently conducted to the way that I propose and show what I think is the most compelling reason to attempt this. So using a table that illustrates the way that currently the World Series main event is working. This is level 2 to level 3, so the 100-200 increases to the 150-300. We have three varying stack sizes of 10, 20, and 40,000, or 50, 100, and 200 big blinds. Once the level increases, their stack sizes will decrease to 33, 67, 133 big blinds. But what you notice is there's a percentage decline that's the same across all of the stack sizes. So, but there's a greater absolute difference between the really large stacks losing big blinds compared to the smaller stacks losing big blinds. And this is the same also when you look at the increase from level 20 to level 21, from the 6,000, 12,000 with a 2 to the 8,000, 16,000 with a 2 on a 600,000, 900,000, and 2.4 million chip stack. And you're going to go from 50 to 37 blinds, 75 to 56 blinds, and 200 to 150 blinds, but it's still a 25% decline. So essentially there's more of a penalty for the larger stacks. They lose more big blinds. The way I propose to do it, and using stack decay, let's say you have a tournament that starts the players off with 200 big blinds, and it has a 15% decay, and losing 30 blinds per level. You can see the effect it's going to have on varying stack sizes as the level changes. So as the level changes, the 30 stack size goes to 15 for a 50% loss. The same occurs with a 50 big blind stack, goes to 25 for a 50% loss. The 75 blind stack will decline to 40%, down to an average stack of 200, declining 15% like you would expect. And larger stacks has a less of a percentage effect on their stacks, about 300 to 270 and 400 to 370. So what effect does this have? Well, normally most players wouldn't consider themselves to be desperately short with 30 blinds, but faced with the prospect of losing half your stack when the level increases, you're going to feel a lot more desperate at that point. But as you can see, a 30 blind stack is going to be it's going to be difficult for a player with 30 blinds to get all 30 of those blinds in pre-flop, because he's not going to get any action when he has a good hand, and will get action when he has a marginal hand and runs into a big hand. So he'll be forced to make a more standard raise and play poker after the flop. And the same occurs at the other end of the spectrum with the larger stacks when they're playing against a smaller effect. The effective stack is in the 30 to 50 blind range, and the impact of losing 30 to 50 blinds on a 300 blind stack and the level change is percentage-wise a lot less. There's a lot less damage done to the larger stacks. So they'd be more willing to take a flop or play back at a smaller stack, and that would then result in a little bit more post-flop play. And I think that's the whole essence of poker, is playing post-flop rather than shoving all in pre-flop. I think this approach provides many advantages to skilled players who are already understanding how stack size relates to opening ranges. Players can easily tell the health of their own and their opponent's stacks, and calculating pot sizes and pot odds will be easier with fewer chips in the middle. Additional advantages include elimination of massive stacks that take up too much room and are hard to move from table to table. Elimination of color ups is a plus, as already discussed. Decaying stacks magnify the effect of getting short rather than rewarding it. It encourages action because players will not want to risk becoming short in the first place. No longer can one simply just sit and wait for a big hand. Skilled players will gain an advantage because those who do not properly adjust when they have fewer than 2 times the decay will not be playing optimally. Players who do allow themselves to be relatively short stacked will not have the luxury of getting all in pre-flop with their stacks, forcing them into post-flop play. And players who allow themselves to get under a quarter of the decay are hopelessly trapped as a short stack, requiring 2 double ups just to get a playable stack. Thanks for watching my video. I appreciate any comments or additions that you have below. And alternatively, you could send me a tweet at Jindoc. Thanks.